Welcome back to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave.
And I'm Niall Stanage. CNN's Jake Tapper fired back at Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, who said that it was the White House's choice to keep the government shut down. Let's watch.
Should the Democratic senators from New Mexico, your home state, vote to open the government so that these SNAP funds are not at risk?
Let me be clear. The administration is choosing to starve American children with money that they already have appropriated.
I'm not applauding their
tactics.
By
the White House.
Well,
this is a choice by the White House.
This is also, Congresswoman, this is also a choice by Senate Democrats to not vote to open the government. Yes, it is. I understand why they're doing it. They're doing it because they want Medicaid funds restored. They're doing it because they want Obamacare premiums to be extended past the end of the year. I understand the reasoning.
Sir, let me just be clear. The money for contingency plans is sitting there. That is why the states are suing. The White House is withholding funds from
2 to 3 weeks worth of SNAP funds. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it may not be a big deal to you, but let me tell you that for the grandparents, for grandparents that literally are feeding their children,
my point is that it's a short-term solution.
In those accounts,
it's a short-term.
At the end of the day, people need to be able to feed their families, and Saturday is when those funds run out.
If you feel so
and
strongly,
we are fighting
Congresswoman,
to get
why
that
not
funding.
ask the Senate Democrats from New Mexico to vote to open the government?
That was a little feistier than they get sometimes over there on CNN.
Well, it was, and I think we should just say, because we're often critical of not only CNN but cable news outlets generally, that was good interviewing by Jake Tapper, and put pressure on with completely legitimate, journalistically valid questions there. So good for him.
The point being that it takes two to tango, and the government remains shut down, verging on the longest shutdown ever. We've almost gotten there, I think.
Yep.
And look, I guess you'd say to Democrats, can you have it both ways? You're making this stance that you think is important over Obamacare and other healthcare subsidy type stuff, but in the meantime, food stamps those payments are not going to be made, and you got to pick one or the other. And if you want that to happen, you got to vote for it. And Republicans are okay to let the government just be shut down in the meantime. Kind of plays into some of the broader goals of the Trump administration vis-a-vis cutting government anyway, although I would argue this is not a good and efficient way to cut government, because eventually they will restart the government. They will give back pay to all government employees that have been furloughed in this time period. There's some discomfort over how to pay the troops and law enforcement that nobody likes. So this is not really ideal for either side, even from a cutting government sort of perspective. But somebody's got to give, and there'll be, if you're just not going to get the healthcare thing and the SNAP benefits unless Trump dramatically changes his mind, which I guess is possible.
It's possible. From the political perspective, the concern that I've always had about the Democratic position, I remember we spoke about this at the very outset of the shutdown, is that they are trying to leverage a government shutdown against a party that is much more skeptical about government than they are. So that is always, I think, a dangerous position to be in. It matters more ultimately to Democrats to have the government open than it does to quite a few Republicans, notwithstanding the other points that you were making about restricting government. Now, to be fair to the Congresswoman there, it is true that there is a contingency fund for SNAP benefits. To be fair to Jake Tapper, the amount of money in it would only cover about 2 or 3 weeks. And then you're going to be in the same place as you are right now. Now, I'm not saying that means that Democrats should necessarily just fold, should collapse their tent and go home. They do want to make this point about the Obamacare subsidies in particular and healthcare more broadly. But I'm just not sure that they have a winning political hand. Yeah. That's basically the bottom line.
It's 40 million Americans who get SNAP benefits. I am not hugely in favor of welfare as a core function of government. It wouldn't be the first thing I would get rid of as I went and started doing government cuts. There's lots of government I would cut. I would slash the defense budget in half. I would cancel wholesale departments. I would fire lots of employees. I think plenty of Americans if their taxpayer dollars are going to something, are okay with people who can't make ends meet getting some assistance. I'm not even actually particularly in favor of doing some of the like what you can buy with it tweaks, or like, ruling out fatty food or whatever that's been discussed, because I actually think it just causes more bureaucratic headaches trying to determine, or is now grocery store people have to determine whether you can pay for that or you can pay for that. I think that's just probably slowing down the checkout line in ways that are annoying for everyone. So I'm not big into that. Frankly, I would just make cash. If we're going to do welfare, I would just get cash payments to people and let them figure out what they need to, what areas, what gaps they have in their lives where they need some kind of income supplement. So that's fine. I'm not rejoicing that people are not getting their welfare, although I would certainly like to create or look toward ways to make our system more sustainable, such that there isn't such a tremendous number of people who need that amount of money to help them. Right. To the extent they even do need it. I do know there are some people who are on it, or at least on the state programs I've known from when I was a young person, that you could take advantage of as a college student because you technically have no income, even though you're wildly and obscenely rich. I don't know how much of that is a part of the national program.
Right. But I mean, I think on the welfare issue itself, I mean, this is just one of those topics where you and I have the biggest divergent difference or divergent philosophical view. Because my argument would be, if one takes the libertarian sort of very free market stance, it gives, in my opinion, far too much power to corporations. The reason that there are 40 million people on food stamps basically is many of those people are working and not getting paid a sufficient income to feed themselves or feed their families. Therefore, I would be in favor of strengthening labor laws or upping the minimum wage to a point where that was less of a difficulty. But given that that is the situation in which we find ourselves, and people are working and still basically on the brink of indigence, then the government has to step in. Otherwise, people are going to be working and hungry, which I don't consider just in this country.
Funny enough, I would sooner strengthen welfare or make additional cash payments than I would increase the minimum wage or make different labor regulations. Because, I mean, my problem with the minimum wage is that you negatively impact people whose the value of their work is simply not worth the number you've assigned to it. That is true of, I think it's true of young people, particularly starting out. When I was starting out as a journalist, the value of my labor was very, very, very low. You could have replaced me with, a bunch of other people. And if you had to pay me a starting salary well beyond what they did decide to pay me, they just never would have hired me. So I'm skeptical of it for that reason. I think the effective minimum wage is just zero. Because if that's if you're not worth that number, they're just not going to pay you in the first place. I would rather equalize, frankly, by then doing the cash pay, saying, but what you need to live, fine. Then here's your payment for being a person who lives in this country that takes care of people. Here's your additional cash payment, rather than trying to tinker with what employers are allowed to charge. That I think excessively burdens them and is not to our benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously no problem at all in tinkering with what employers are allowed to pay. Look, I think that, again, this is just a fundamental difference, because I mean, to my mind, the situation or the real world does not exist in the kind of, I think, equilibrium that you think it does, where there's an employer on one side and a potential employee on the other, and they come to the market somehow naturally determines a fair price for that person's labor. There are massive corporations with enormous financial power and individual workers who, in isolation, have very little bargaining power. Therefore, it is incumbent upon government, the kind hand of big government, to step in, Robby, and to create a more fair situation by acting on behalf of people who do not as individuals have very much power.
Well, tell us what you think about that. And thanks for watching Free Media this week. We'll be back with more great content. Actually, we're going to try to get Niall and Amber in the same room next week. It'll be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Talk to you then.